This is Platemark with me, Ann Schaefer. You have found us at Series 2, A History of Western Prints. Today we've got Part 2 on William Hogarth, the first British artist we've talked about and the father of Western sequential art. We are concluding today with even more series following on the first episode, and we're delving even farther into the underbelly of morality in London in the 18th century during the Enlightenment. As always, our leader is Tru Ludwig. As usual, there's a ton of images. You can find them over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Over there, you can also click through to join our Facebook group or even support the podcast by hitting the support and donate button. All right, buckle up. Let's get rolling. Hey, Tru.
Hi, Ann. How you doing?
I am all right. Thanks for sitting down for Part 2 of Hogarth. This is exciting.
Yeah, it had to happen. I couldn't not let it happen. And given how things are going these days and the media and in the political air, which is full of who flung poo, it just seemed really important to me to try and get this episode at least recorded before the election. The fateful November 5th, yes. 2014.
I don't think I can get it done by then.
Wow.
But.
November 5th, 2024. I made a Freudian slip just then, pretended it was 10 years earlier.
Oh, geez.
Well, yeah, I know. We're at a moment here in the world, aren't we? So we're going to continue on our theme of the Enlightenment. And as a little subtle reminder to our ersatz listeners, some who listen, maybe some who are just coming aboard the first time for this particular episode. The former episode, Hogarth 1, I was talking about William Hogarth as an extension of the concept of the Enlightenment. And I don't know, is this their fourth or fifth on the topic of the Enlightenment?
Well, we did 2 general on Enlightenment that included anatomy. And then we did Maria Sibylla Marian, and then we did Hogarth 1.
Right. The concept of the Enlightenment, and I've mentioned this many times, but I will again, that I have a punch list for my students because Ann and I have agreed that we sort of hop-skipped over that in the history of art, the 18th century. It's just avoidable, but
not much going on. But there is.
But isn't there? And the magic punch list, which some will remember, I wanted to bring to the foreground this time for the second part of Hogarth, the fact that he was the son of a schoolmaster, that he is a child of education, and that he educated himself very carefully and thoughtfully. And for the Enlightenment mind, the concept that education was equivalent to progress, that the more you know, the better you know, the better you can do. So that's important. The concept of education is part of progress, that a person's existence on this mortal plane should be to improve the society of which they are a part, to reform the institutions for better, hopefully not for ill, and to develop the taste of this new thing called the middle class, which is growing. And with that said, the growing middle class means that there's a more active commercial sense of things like the arts, as we've talked about with the concept of going to the academy and seeing the annual exhibition and those kinds of things.
Have we talked about the flip to the middle class? I feel like we have, but I can't remember where, when.
The flip to middle, you mean the
middle
poor?
Class? Like, why suddenly do we have a greater gradation of strata in society than we did between feudal and...
Well, in part, if you think about the concept of the English society and the parliament and the fact that it is, in air quotes, the people governing themselves as opposed to kings and tyrants, that's part of it. Now, admittedly, they still have a king in France, and they're going to have a little bit of a problem with that until they start lopping the heads off of some of them. And then, of course, there'll be this little short guy that comes to power, and there'll be an issue with that for a while. Spain is going to stay entirely Spanish and entirely Catholic and entirely monarchic. But the growing middle class, let's think about the Low Countries. Let's think about Holland. Let's think about merchants and bankers and people who do have the capacity to regulate their own behavior and become a contributing member of their society. That's a growing issue. And particularly in England, it is. When we talk about, and then there's us, of course, the United States.
It's about the Republic.
For which it stands.
Going from monarchies to...
Correct. And I leave that to the political historians to talk about it.
I know, but I just feel like all of a sudden you've got this big fat middle class and
it's not big fat, but it definitely wait until this century with us in the Americas.
Right.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
At any rate, but the concept of the age of reason and how more humans had more capacity to wrap their heads around what was possible, I think is of key importance. And so in the past, I've shown images, the heads will roll, the many wonderful portrait heads that we see, many of these by Houdon, Voltaire, we've got Diderot, who did the Encyclopédie. You have Ben Franklin, the great scientist and statesman, a bit gouty in the leg. You have George Washington. You have Joachim Winckelmann, or Johann Winckelmann, which someday I might talk about, because he actually sort of comes up today a little bit obliquely. And then I added William Hunter to that, because he is in fact an anatomist, not only a doctor, but also a keen draftsperson. And to that I have added the self-portrait by Hogarth. Mm-hmm. Because if we think about all of the things that Hogarth was doing, he really is an Enlightenment soul. He really is a self-made man, literally, having come from humble means and aspiring for greatness and wanting to be a part of the betterment of society, but definitely wanted to be a part of the academy. But he was also a shrewd kind of a guy. So there are many things that he's done that impress me tremendously. And so I've added his self-portrait, and it's a winsome portrait of himself with his palette. And it's always neat to see artist palettes painted by artists themselves. So you can kind of see how they lay out their colors and so on. And there he is in his proper wig, looking like the Enlightenment soul. But at the same time, he's living at a time where the wig will eventually be doffed for the look of looking more like one of the proletariat. Well, that concept of Hogarth, I'm going to remind us again of this self-portrait that Hogarth had done 10 years later, the painter with his pug in 1745. And again, I will remind you that his pug's name is?
Trump.
Yeah. It's really hard for me to accept that, but okay.
It's so weird.
But Trump was an okay word, They use it in bridge and all kinds of stuff.
It will never again be.
No, kind of like the name Monica. The use of the word name Monica really fell from use after about 1992. I wonder why. But
good up if you're younger than that.
It was a big deal to my son when he was writing all about Clinton in 8th grade. And,
boy.
At any rate, we have Hogarth, a self-portrait, and he's done it in a very much Enlightenment manner because he's featured himself in a porthole kind of a portrait. It's kind of a trompe-l'oeil, if you will, because it could be a portrait or it could be a tondo, a round portrait that's being shown on a canvas that's being swaddled by some Baroque drapery and his dog named
Trump.
But I want you also to notice, Anne, what is the portrait sitting on top of?
Well, it's resting against a stack of 3 books.
And that stack of 3 books is very carefully considered because what you'll realize is that those are volumes of Shakespeare, Milton, and Swift.
Huh.
There's no way a guy could do a self-portrait in his turban with his painterly garb on and not say, I recognize these as forebears that are of incredible importance to me because of his job as a storyteller. Hogarth as a storyteller is a remarkable thing. And we established that pretty well in the first episode. There's one other thing I want you to notice, and that's in the palette that's in the lower left-hand corner of this self-portrait, and it says something. I've even given you a magic red arrow so you won't miss it.
It says the line of beauty, WH.
Yes, the line of beauty with this lovely serpentine line.
What's underneath it? There's GRM maybe?
There's more dates and you'll see.
There's some things under there.
Yeah, so that means another thing. Go see the painting in real life.
Right.
Because, okay, and that means we're going to the Tate in Britain again. Okay, sounds good, right?
Tate Britain. I love that one. Almost more than Tate Modern.
Well, so let's go.
Okay.
All right, fine, because there's the Hogarth Circle and there's a Hogarth house that's open now.
Oh, nice.
So on and so forth. Because that's the other thing is how well respected Hogarth is to these days. Students of art history who had to take art history, I think they think of him as that painter who did that raucously funny painting cycle of Marriage a la Mode. Then there are the others, he was a printmaker, he was an engraver. I think there's these two worlds, this Venn diagram that doesn't realize that he was really both. And that, honestly, he's a dense fact in a number of ways, because not only was he a painter, peintre graveur, he was a painter, engraver, or printmaker, but he was one of the very first pictorial satirists, and he was an incredibly wonderful, biting social critic, and he did editorial cartoons, the first of their kind, if you will. And yeah, without question, after last episode, I think we could safely say that he is the father of Western sequential art, which all illustration majors would go bonkers about, because sequential art's where it's at.
Here comes comics.
Kinda, yeah. And so I had made the point last time that he was a marvelous mirror to his time in much the same way as Bruegel or Bosch before him. And after Hogarth would be Daumier and let's say Goya, and then let's say Tom Huck, because why not say Tom Huck? It was good to see you last week, Tom. And so one of the things that Hogarth contributes, and we discussed this quite a bit, was the concept of moral genre. And that concept of genre, even though it was clear at the bottom of this hierarchy of painting, that genre and using the scenes of everyday life of regular folk as a way to tell the stories and teach lessons was one of the key ways that Hogarth and others that were working during the Enlightenment, during the 18th century, could really improve the society of which they were a part. So we had mentioned last time that we hadn't said word one about England in any of our prior episodes, not one whit. And so we had mentioned about how in the 1600s that England was starting to come on deck a little bit. You know, you had Inigo Jones and the banqueting house at Whitehall, and you had Sir Christopher Wren not only designing, what's that one?
St. Paul's.
Yeah, but additionally, maybe at least 50 new churches, including St. Paul's in London after the 50
Wow.
in London after the Great Fire of 1666.
Jeez.
So, you know, with that, if you look at the facade of St. Paul's and you see, oh, it's really a large homage to Palladio, Andrea Palladio, the first century Roman architect, and that really brings us into the Renaissance, and that brings us back into the classical sense, and that's another way of going, ooh, the classical, the Greco-Roman past, it's everywhere around us. If the dude's doing 50 churches in London, that shows a great amount of erudition. It shows an understanding of his past, and it also shows that the body politic, the body in public, that churches are around people, and those are the kinds of things that they're going to recognize. Even St. Martin's in the Field is in a Georgian style, which owes a debt to the classical. Right? And so there you have all that. Now, we got to get back to our friend William Hogarth. And, you know, we had talked about how he had been born in 1697, just 30 years after the Great Fire, and that he died in 1764. So he is a perfect example of the child of the Enlightenment. And many of the things that he's going to lampoon are the kinds of things that Daumier would take on 100 years later. And the fact that he was like Daumier, coming from almost nothing and establishing all kinds of new categories for art is wonderful indeed, because just as in literature and in some aspects of the fine arts, new categories of visual imagery are coming about. Son of a schoolmaster, you know, we talked about how his dad was a Latin teacher. The family had no money. His dad had this great idea about opening a coffee shop. It didn't go well.
You could only speak Latin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
No.
It's like, wow, what a crappy kind of a meal would you get at an all Latin cafe house now?
Imagine the kind of people you'd be.
Ui Ignus es.
I can't speak a word
Where's
of Latin.
the fire? So Hogarth's dad is imprisoned in the debtor's prison when Hogarth is 10, and he isn't released until Hogarth is 15. And if you think about it as yourself, as any young man, those formative years between 10 and 15, who are you and what will you become? And so in many respects, and I certainly can't fault him on this, he spent much of his life defying those humble beginnings and doing his damnedest to rise in English society, and he does pretty well. You know, he becomes an apprentice to an engraver at the age of 16. He has always been looking at street life in the crazy, teeming, wonderful, raucous London, which is growing. And the fairs and all of the characters that he sees. And I'd read you a really tasty passage from one of my favorite books, The Bite of the Print, all about how raucous and huge and teeming and stinky and seething London was. It was just absurdly, I mean, I don't think we can even begin to imagine what the stench must have been like, let alone the busyness of it. And the concepts of pickpockets and every aspect of society literally bumping up against itself. So by 1720, Hogarth has, in fact, established his own business engraving coats of arms and all these smart kinds of things that are completely useful, book plates and such, and doing some small conversation pieces, kinds of portraits for people. And he includes actors. Now, keep this in mind because he always does look to actors and theater as a part of his inspiration. In fact, you'll see later on, David Garrick, who was an incredibly important actor of his day, would become a very good friend of his. In fact, he would write his epitaph. Yeah. He would do a series of portraits in John Gay's very popular Beggar's Opera. Hogarth was keenly aware of the theater and how it was growing by leaps and bounds. And if you think about the people that he rubbed shoulders with, some of them weren't just magistrates, they were also playwrights. They were also this and that. Remember that this is an area of the Enlightenment and you could have more than one skill set, you know.
Do you think he befriended actors because he had them strike a pose in some scene for him to sketch from? And
how could he not?
Right.
Theater with many new kinds of shows, different kinds of genres of what entertainment was really booming in the 18th century as well. So he also meets Sir James Thornhill and visits his free art academy and happens to marry his daughter, which really helps because cha-ching, that helps step up his game a little bit. He's working for a print seller. He understands the trade really well. And he starts producing print satires, which I'm impressed by the fact that as a young fellow of 24, he's got a keen eye on understanding many of the machinations of English society, if you will. And then he's also got this soft spot, I wonder why, for people who come to the big city from outside. And so we told a good bit about the story of the Harlot's Progress, this moral story narrative that he had published in 1732, which was a delightful set of 6 images that he had engraved himself and that became a smashing success for him.
But people would buy them.
Oh, yeah.
And did he sell them in subscriptions, or you get the first 2 and then later you get the second? I wonder. Anyway, it doesn't
Honestly,
matter.
I know for a fact that the Rake's Progress was sold as a subscription set, but I can't honestly recall whether or not the Harlot's Progress was sold as a set or not.
Yeah.
But you know, they're really wonderfully scaled for being exhibited in the home. I'm giving Anne a view of all 6 of them together, and just if you soften your eyes and you look at the little thumbnails, can you see a whole play just staging out in front of you the whole way through? It's really quite something to think about how he brings this young lady to town, how he cooks up the whole story. Her name is Moll Hackabout, which is interesting because Moll Flanders, a novel, had been published, maybe 7 years earlier. So he's already picking and choosing very smart names for characters in a really wonderful way. How this young, lovely girl comes in from the country and becomes a
Lady of the Night.
Sure, sure, we can say that. What's another word for it?
Prostitute?
Yeah, that's the one that was
the
really...
one we're looking for?
Yeah, but sex workers we could say now.
Yeah, sex workers probably.
But prostitute in his time was really what that would be. First of all, he had painted 6 paintings. Those become the 6 engravings that become the series. The series sells incredibly. The cycle of paintings is lost to time because they got burned up in a fire. He turns his attention to a second cycle, which is wonderful, realizing that the modern moral subjects is going to be a hit, and he understands they really sold well. It's astonishing, really, how much he had his finger on the pulse of society with the concept that prints are being shown in shop windows and in pubs and in public buildings and sold in print shops, and that it's another way to kind of do an end run around the art academy too, because like a genie out of the bottle, prints can function outside that really strict hierarchical academy of subjects, right? So, history painting and all the way down to genre at the bottom, seeing below still life. But you see, what do the simple folk do? Well, let's just not paint them. They're terrible.
But also, this points to something that we've said, but will come more important later, which is there were no such things as limited editions at this point. So he could print on demand.
He could, yeah. But these were his images, but the other problem is that there was demand, so others printed his stuff on demand too, by making these wretched copies, which pissed him off more than you could possibly believe. But remember, this is a young man who's figuring out, where will I fit in society? What will I do? How can I make a name for myself? He's a really adept painter. But I don't think most of us realize that until we get to Marriage a la mode. That's the thing that everybody sees these days. He writes in his manuscripts that painting and engraving modern moral subjects to treat my subjects as a dramatic writer. My picture is my stage. That's his goal. And so he uses some of that marvelous Dutch genre painting, and he uses the concept of the broadside and the popular print that he sees in England, but in a way he elevates them and gives us this cycle of stories that are beautifully composed in terms of image, in terms of lights and darks, in terms of the position of the characters on the set. Go ahead, Anne, you were going to say something.
No, I'm just thinking about precedents. Dutch genre had been a thing, but we haven't seen...
Not in cycles, though, really.
Yeah.
Not that I can think of.
Right.
These beautiful standalone things like a young couple playing by a harpsichord, or the concert of
Seven
love.
Vices, but it's not really a narrative cycle.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. But, and I'll mention this again later, but the fact that this cycle establishes awareness of this kind of possibility of what the print can do, there's no way he can see in his mind's eye when he's creating this in 1732. But the fact that this particular series leads to the establishment of the Magdalen Hospital for prostitutes, which is the oldest one in England, which was established in 1758, that's as a direct result of his work. And I think that he sees himself as a reformer. I have such respect for this guy. In one respect, I see him as such an idealist, as such a fervent artist, as such a fervently frustrated individual, because the Academy never really took full recognition of him. But this concept that, what will I do for my next print? What will my subject matter be? Why make anything in multiples? I can feel him thinking that. You hear me talk endlessly about what my next cycle will be, about what my next story will be. I have this whole concept of doing a Genesis cycle. What is this young man going to do next? And I could just feel the wheels turning for him.
The other thing that's so interesting is, and maybe this isn't the first time for this either, but he's on her side.
Yes.
He's skewering the society that caused her downfall.
Exactly.
Not her for being loose.
He's exactly right. He's not mocking her.
No.
And actually, you see that in many ways. It's as though it's nurture, not nature. She's not inherently a bad person. He sees her as someone who moved to the big city and had to find her way. And it was found by the wrong people and led down the wrong path. In one respect, it could be considered a lowbrow subject, but it's also a cautionary tale.
Sure.
And he uses his knowledge of precedents in terms of the Bible are very strong. You know, son of a schoolmaster's dad teaches Latin. There's no way the guy can't know about biblical things, with which I can show you with great certainty in this subsequent cycle coming up soon. So what is it? How does he follow up this huge hit that he had with this brand new thing called A Harlot's Progress, which is, what a great, it follows the title, A Pilgrim's Progress. He's even building on traditions that had been in literature before, but now it's this visual thing. Now we still have all of the 8 paintings that he created for the next cycle that became the engravings of The Rake's Progress, which he published in 1735, and they still exist. And so Anna and I will take a field trip to John Soane's museum to see these.
And you should too.
As well as the election cycle, because those are all there too.
Oh, cool.
And that's what we're really going to get at today.
Okay.
But the concept of the Rake's Progress was also to show what it was that caused this young man to be born of money, inherit his father's money, squander his father's money, treat the woman he impregnated poorly, go whoring and drinking and get thrown into prison, and then eventually die in Bedlam in an asylum. And right there, I want to point out to you that the last 2 scenes are a prison scene and a scene in an asylum, realizing also that he's one of the first to show the interiors of prisons, which he would want to reform, and the concept of asylums, which in this case, you were shocked and amazed to find out that there were women walking by in their bonnets who went to the asylum to see what the nutcases looked like, because that was something you could go do.
Like a sideshow.
Yes. And that's, again, thinking about what is the story, what's the lesson here? So the thing about the Rake's Progress was that it wasn't as big a hit. The biggest thing you notice is that there were 8, that he also engraved all of these himself. He was still pissed about the whole copyright thing, but he was working assiduously to get that changed so that his intellectual property could be protected, because nothing had existed up to that point. And so you can see that he's engraving his own scenes, but he's also Aside on the address, what are you seeing on that at the bottom of the print here?
It looks like there's narrative going on there.
Tons of it.
Yeah.
Not only is it invented, printed, engraved, and published by himself, Hogarth, according to an act of parliament, but it also contains the entirety of the poetry of the story that goes with its captions.
Oh.
So that's, oh, vanity of age, untoward, ever spleeny, ever forward. Why those butts and mags with the long F?
Yes, hard to read.
Yeah. However, imagine getting this series of 8 prints that you can sit and read out loud and talk with people about in your home. That youthful mind with freedom mend and with its father mix the friend. It's just so loaded, but you have to take the time. It rewards what, Anne?
Scrutiny.
That's right. Everything takes time. And again, this series was pirated extensively. Can you imagine just like, son of a bitch,
That's
doing
so
it again?
ballsy.
You know, but hey, they're businessmen, right? And again, I'm reminding you the concept of Hogarth and how many nuggets and tidbits there are within the prison scenes or within Bedlam, you know, the scene in the nut house where the ladies, the lovely, lovely ladies are coming by to visit to just see what the sideshow of crazy people look like. And aren't we better than that? Now imagine that he won't do any more of these kinds of cycles. He will not do them until for sure he's got a copyright so that nobody will steal his ideas. And when he finally does, he comes up with marriage a la mode, marriage of the day or marriage of today or of the moment, the fashion of marriage. He now is so well off that he doesn't need to engrave them himself. Well, why the hell should he? Right?
Right.
My sources have told me that Hogarth still did the faces himself of his painted engravings, or his engraved paintings, let us say. And I made sure to include the address on this because I think it's really fascinating to be able to see his whole tale of Lord Squanderfield and his dilettante son, who is, with the help of lawyer Silvertongue, is going to marry this stupid boy with the title off to the middle-class merchant and his daughter, who has money but wants a title. It's just this marriage of convenience. And in the case of this tragic story of the marriage a la mode, how the middle-class girl is now becoming a tart who gets to have her playful evenings and he's out whoring and drinking. But the whole concept of how Hogarth could hire different guys to do, I think, what's that, if I recall correctly, he had 3 different French guys engrave 2 of each of the scenes. But you can also sense that Hogarth is supervising so carefully. And I can't blame him there.
Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting in this case, he's not just looking at the foibles of the lower or the middle class. Now he's mocking the upper class, right, which is great fun, I think, for those of us that don't come from the upper class.
Right. All's fair in love and war.
Yeah, and these foibles of society is an incredibly hot topic of the time. What's marriage supposed to be? And it is a skewering of all of society. But I find this intriguing. There are many that think that these paintings are the best of his serially planned story cycles. The paintings, right? But the series was not as well received as the Harlot's or the Rake's Progress.
I feel like specifically the Harlot's Progress is an innocent person who you could root for and feel sorry for. The Rake's Progress, not so much, because he's kind of a ne'er-do-well. And the marriage, probably because they're wealthy.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking at them like, ugh, they deserve it.
You know, and it's sort of like, okay, so he didn't sell as well in his sophomore album.
There is a curse of the sophomore album.
Yeah. Now we're on the 3rd iteration. You know, even though the paintings are paintings and they're fine in their own right and they're at the National Gallery, their original purpose, he created the paintings as the fodder for the engravings. I enjoy that fact, you know?
Yeah.
Other painters, I make paintings.
Right.
Well, you might engrave my paintings. And here's a guy who can play both sides, which I think is marvelous. And he's playing the system, which I also find really marvelous. You have these paintings that are essentially, I don't know, maybe 30 by 36. The engravings are maybe 13 by 18, something like that. It all works. They're really great sizes. And you need to have a good size engraving to be able to read the copious amounts of detail that he has in there. And through all of this, he's wanting so hard to become a great artist and be regarded by the elite circles, the circles of Sir Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Rayburn and those types, to become the master of the noble portrait. Well, that's not exactly how that goes for him. But the thing that gets me so pleased about him is that he is, in fact, an artist reformer. And he did have concrete results in his work, that there was legislative follow through on some of the things that he went to town on. And so not only was it the Magdalene Hospital, but as you'll see in a few minutes, a couple other things that really quite matter. I did want to bring to your attention a couple of the society portraits that he did. He had done this amazing portrait in 1746 of the actor William Garrick, as I had mentioned, as Richard III, for which Garrick had paid him the highest dollar amount ever paid, 200 British pounds sterling.
Whoa.
More than any English artist had ever received for a single portrait, he claimed. But I also wanted to show you the amazing engraving of that painting. And you can imagine how Garrick really enjoyed this. This portrait engraving of an actor really lets you see how well involved this artist was in the society of his day. Now take a look at this and remember that there are no cameras.
Right.
And that you have a painter, a peintre graveur, doing a portrait of Richard III. And it's got a gorgeous address too. Look at this. William Garrick and the character of Richard III. Engraved by William Hogarth. And a little help by another guy. But take a look at this. What do you see?
Well, it's so unusual for a portrait because he's obviously as the character. So that, A, that's different. And B, he's kind of in this repose, but surprised repose with his hand up, like, whoa, dude, what's going on?
Kind of an epiphany that he's having as the battle rages outside. You know, and his armor's down at on the lower left-hand corner. Look at the textures of that.
Yeah.
In the engraving, and look at there's some Baroque quality to this. And one of the things that we've noticed over and over again already is that Hogarth is, if you think about it, kind of the English Rococo, these lovely interior scenes, these smaller scale scenes, but this actually feels like a fairly Baroque kind of a portrait.
Yeah, it does.
This engraving could be an enormously huge painting, but to see how this image comes to life, this whole scene of Richard III in his tent as the battle's outside, with Christ on the cross behind him, and the fur and the hands are so gloriously done.
The hands are great.
And the portrait face, the shock and amazement of that face, it's just delicious.
And the satin tights are fantastic.
And a little droop, they're a little bit knee sprung.
Yeah.
Just remarkable. And like any other Hogarth, there's still tons of little details, but I think this one is a little less rife with tiny, tiny details. However, William Garrick, of course, enjoyed this tremendously. And so the whole bit of it is, it's all Hogarth, Hogarth, Hogarth. You can see that he can do the society portrait. Well, the other thing I wanted to put on your radar was that Hogarth had also printed or published his Analysis of Beauty. It is a publication of 1753, published in London. And it is indeed the Analysis of Beauty, and my favorite subtitle is Written with a View of Fixing the Fluctuating Ideas of Taste by William Hogarth.
That's awesome.
And if you can see, there's a pull quote from Milton underneath too. What is it? So varied be, and of his tortuous train curled many a wanton wreath and fire of Eve to lure her eye.
Jeez.
But what do you see on a pedestal right there?
Right. That's the same swirl that was on the palette with the Eye of Beauty.
There you go. And that was a portrait he had done
of himself.
In 1745. And this is 8 years later. But remember, this is a guy who had opened a little academy for aspiring artists. And so this is his analysis of what beauty is and how he teaches it.
This is the textbook that he wished he'd had as he was teaching.
Correct.
Right.
And also realize that there still is no official Royal Academy of Fine Art and Painting. It won't exist until 1768.
So a few years off.
Yeah. So he's writing an artistic treatise, and it's published, and here we have the title page of it with this. I adore the fact that he's got this pyramid with this S curve in it. And when I look at this and I think about how he's thinking as an Enlightenment thinker, And what is my analysis of beauty? Just like we're going to write an encyclopedia of everything we know. We're going to come up with theorems. We're going to come up with governments. We're going to come up with all these different ideas. He's coming up with instruction on how to understand beauty. And the thing that blows my mind is that this wasn't taken as serious as it could have been by the critics or the upper echelon artists of his day. But he completely describes his ideas of visual beauty and grace in the manner accessible to, and this is what I think is his downfall, to the common man of his day.
That'll do it.
See, maybe he's too lowbrow. So really prominent in Hogarth's ideas about beauty was that the S-shaped or the serpentine curve line that excites the attention of the viewer and it evokes liveliness and movement. Now, what is it that made the great work great? How was that thought about? Well, he tells us in the analysis of beauty that it's this intellectual centerpiece. It really is his treatise. The great art historian Ernst Gombrich even described Hogarth's tome as the grim campaign against the fashionable taste.
Grim campaign?
Yes, because he got so weary of the smoky reverence for an ancient past. He called them smoked paintings of the past. Hogarth described this book as his war with the connoisseurs.
Wow.
He's aiming it at a common human being. Like, you and I could have picked up this book.
Right.
And gone, okay, how do you make beauty? And I'm showing you one of the illustrations from the analysis of beauty, and it's showing this S curve, which students of today would have no idea what learning to write in cursive.
Right.
The beauty of that formation now, there can only... Here's the other thing I don't get. So we learned cursive, cursory. It means to be able to write faster. Mm-hmm. But to be able to write faster with the letters connected could be a beautiful and artful moment. But here you have the beauty of the serpentine F.
The F curve.
Look how beautiful it is. And now there were two plates, which blew my mind in retrospect. I stumbled across two of the engravings from this book and bought them. And yeah, I know. And somewhere in this house are these two engravings from the analysis of beauty. Does this engraving by Hogarth, does this not look like... I don't know. It's almost like the periodic table of everything you should know and do about art.
Oh, that's funny. It looked to me like the School of Athens for a second.
Yes, everything you should know and do about art. Go ahead and pick it apart because that's a brilliant way of putting it.
I mean, it doesn't actually, but there's something about
because it's classical looking, very Renaissance. Why? Pick it apart.
Okay, well, there's a central image that's a scene with a lot of, I can't even tell what's going on, but there's a lot of statues and naked peoples.
No, they're nude. They're not naked because it's the Renaissance or this classicism and the human body wasn't to be shamed. They were nude. They're not naked.
It looks like it's
an artist
academy or something.
Very good.
Yes, it looks like a school and there's a lot of things from which you could draw.
So there's a little bit of the Apollo Belvedere, and there's the
the standing
Farnese,
Hercules.
And there's one of many, many Athenas that's standing there in her little pudica pose, with her little hand over her. Go ahead, stay at naughty bits. Go ahead.
Her naughty bits. I was going to call it lady bits.
Okay, lady bits. Fine. And then, various tomes. For instance, I think it might be a bit of a text, a page maybe from Vesalius on the fabric of the human body. Somebody else is sculpting. There's a bit of the Apollo Belvedere.
And there's this giant...
that page,
page of the legs, the muscles.
And it almost looks like a black and white version of the Dagotti.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because those are... anatomical views of a crochet figure.
Right.
So how all of these things to go together, not only that, but they're also in a perspectively depicted space.
Yeah.
And then around all of this, he's got these various forms that appear in nature, how to do drapery, what is the various shapes of the human head. Look at these different kinds of corsets that you could really endure.
A lot of corsets.
A lot of, well, it's Hogarth, yay. And then different kinds, the S curve of which you can aspire to. So the analysis of beauty, he came up with 6 principles that you needed to be aware of, which it's great. You only need to know 6. And so I'm going to give you very briefly some of them. And the first principle of beauty that Hogarth described is fitness, which is not in itself a source of beauty, but can be described as a material cause of it. For instance, fitness does not necessarily imply purpose. However, improperly implied forms cannot be the source of beauty. It is in this that the necessity of fitness must be seen. If not accounted for, A form cannot readily be assumed beautiful.
This is the beginning of body dysmorphia in the media.
Pretty much, yeah.
Jesus.
Well, look at the form of the female body. That's
Well,
what
no,
it's
I
supposed
know.
to, right?
Right. It's all classical and beautiful and everything, but Jesus.
That doesn't allow for all that bizarre. Exactly. Now, the second major principle of beauty is variety. It is the source of beauty, which Hogarth shows us by the contrary notion of sameness. Sameness, a lack of variety, offends the senses. Quote, the ear is as much offended with one even continued tone as the eye is with being fixed up to a point or to the view of a dead wall. So, and then the third notion was of regularity, which is understood as a form of composed variety. And it only pleases us when it is suggestive of fitness. Similar to this notion, in effect, is simplicity, which enhances the pleasure of variety in that it pleases the eye. Now, remember, you're a common person and you can understand this, but
Yeah, right.
got it? The variety which causes a beautiful experience should, so to speak, be tempered by simplicity.
What?
On the other hand, simplicity without variety, at best, does only displease.
What?
Okay, it's common language. You're not living in the 1700s, but here, a couple more just so you have it. The fifth trait of beauty would be intricacy. It's a strange principle in that it does not directly follow from the formal behavior of a beautiful object and so on and so forth, but he does go on to explain how intricacy is tremendously important. Through the movement of our own eye is discrete in itself, the movement of our mind's eye follows a duplicate course of the line, a principal ray of light moving along with the line of sight. The continuous movement of our mind's eye triggers the notion of intricacy. Yeah, see now Anne's just her whole face is caving in now. But this is aimed at us, okay? The common folk. Imagine having to read some sort of tome written by
Reynolds.
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. You see now and now for the heroic portrait.
Put your heads down and fall asleep.
Please shoot me now. Quantity, finally, is associated with the notion of the sublime, which, when Hogarth's book appeared, hadn't even been discussed yet. This is the part that I find amazing. Hogarth is talking about quantity and how the idea of greatness was something that a painting should aspire to. Sure. Well, my point to you is this. This is 4 years before Sir Edmund Burke's philosophy on the concept of the sublime and the beautiful in painting. He's on all the right notes here. Look at the image that he has for this particular chunk of his analysis of beauty. And what you'll see is a vast room full of, shall we say, they look somewhat, Rococo kinds of figures?
Yes, they definitely look Rococo. It's a bunch of couples and I guess they're at a dance.
A dance in a well-appointed, look at all these sculptures nice and whatnot portraits. In sculptures and paintings in a well-appointed interior. Mm-hmm. And the concept of how to represent the human body, to understand the anatomy of things, how to do a wonderful contrapposto, how much arabesque and how much filigree should be present in any image. It's all there. It's really incredibly complete. And if you think about it, it presupposes the landmark book by Burke about the sublime and the beautiful. Well, he's already there.
Yeah.
He just he's not using the word sublime. And that's the one that Edmund Burke would come up with. To me, that just shows this guy's super bright.
Yeah.
He's paying attention to all the clues. He's using all kinds of quotations from classical, from Renaissance, all of these things. And yet he's also keeping the common person, the lay reader, at his base. And so I wanted for you to also take a look at this plate, the Analysis of Beauty, plate 2, and you start to realize how very much it looks like any of the interiors that he's been showing us in his engravings.
Oh, like the Rake's Progress and stuff?
Sure, look at it.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Look, he's playing a bassoon up here in the balcony.
You gotta have a bassoon, right? Look at all
the tricorn hats on the bottom.
Isn't that funny? They're all stacked up because they're doing some kind of minuet or what have you. And all of this, you see here, designed, engraved, and published by William Hogarth with the date and according to the Act of Parliament, which, of course, he had a hand in. To me, the fact that he wrote a treatise on this is phenomenally important. And obviously, he'd been cooking all of this up while he's teaching. Those of us that teach are always trying to figure out, I could use that in class. Which is always the problem when I'm putting these together. I could use that for class. So at the same time that he was formulating the analysis of beauty, his next cycle of prints after Harlot's Progress, Rake's Progress, and Marriage a la Mode, and he's doing those society portraits, is, what do you see here, Anne? The cycle is a 12-print series called
Industry and Idleness,
which is a marvelous cycle about the work ethic, the Protestant work ethic. And so he's illustrating for working children, remember, for working children,
yeah,
because there were children working, because we don't even get to child labor laws until the beginning of the 1900s.
Right.
He's illustrating for working children the possible rewards of good hard work and diligent application, and the sure disasters if you don't. Now, he did not do any preliminary paintings for this. This was an entire cycle of prints. He did 12 of them, and he sold each of the prints for 1 shilling so that it could be completely ownable. Now, 1 shilling, let's see, this source had said, which is the equivalent of 120 pounds in 2023. Well, I don't know, how much money is that? That's still a lot of money, but it's not off the charts.
Right.
But it's aimed for this wider and less wealthy market than his earlier works. Industry and Idleness. Now, the cool part about this, each print is representative. It's of some aspect of the job. What's going to happen to our 2 protagonists as they move their way through as apprentices. What you're seeing in the first plate here of Industry and Idleness are the fellow apprentices at their looms. On the left, you see Thomas Idle.
Oh.
And he is at the left-hand loom, and at the right-hand loom is Francis Goodchild. And both of them, as we follow them through this 12-step cycle, are going on their various paths through up or down the political ladder. So, which one do you suppose will ascend to the pinnacle of power and esteem? And which will go down the path of immorality and crime to complete disgrace and legal infamy? Which one?
I suspect that Thomas Idle, who looks like he's taking a nap at the loom.
He sure is. He's kicking back at his loom, that little bum. Now, if you also notice, I mean, it's typical Hogarth. There's all these little nuggets and treats. Now, over here on Francis Goodchild's side, look at the little embellishment on this side of the print. There's a crown, and a scepter, and some kind of wand of power. And on the left-hand side, along with Thomas Idle, is shown a whip and various implements of being beaten, and they're not good. What do you see underneath each of the boys?
So each of the boys, there's a medallion-ish thing that has proverbs. One says, the drunkard shall come to... I can't read that.
The drunkard shall come to poverty.
Poverty.
And the death of a man in rags. And the one on the right says, the hand of the diligent maketh rich. Now think about this. These are for the growing kids, right? There's a Bible verse under each one. And Hogarth's friend, Reverend Arnold King, had selected the Bible verses. Now, in the Enlightenment, there are those that may have said, oh no, the Bible, the existence of God is in question. Not to children that are in foundlings hospitals, that are in orphanages and such. I'm sure they're having the Bible hammered down on them constantly. And having all of these little reminders are terribly important. The final step, just so you can see the final 2, will show us what becomes of Thomas Idle and Francis Goodchild. And I just thought you should read to our listeners the various titles, because it tells you everything. Here's plate 1, which is exactly on equal footing at their first meeting. Tom is on the left, Francis is on the right, and the master weaver is at the extreme right. And so Tom Idle is leaning back, and he's got his head clunked against the thing that's got some of the opening pages of Moll Flanders, the naughty book, which also is a reference, if you will, to the Harlot's Progress. Right. You'll also notice that the Prentice's Bible, which is underneath and has clearly been referred to by our good apprentice, Francis Goodchild, is now in tatters and being completely ignored by the little slob who's asleep. You can also see, can you see that closely there?
Spitalfields.
Yeah, it's a spittoon for where he spits it. And there's a little bottle of alcohol next to him and some kind of dog that's trying to get at what he's doing too. So there's, again, typical Hogarthian elements all the way through that. Second, just give them the titles and tell me what you think. Okay, The Industrious Prentice.
Performing the duty of a Christian.
So he's in church. He's reading with true love. There's a psalm passage. Yes, they're in their church singing hymns, and there's a psalms passage. And each of these, there's little vignettes in the corners that tell us what's going to happen next.
I see.
Here we have what's happening to the other boy.
The idle prentice at play in the churchyard during divine service.
Now, while the service is going on, what are the boys doing out?
Looks like they're playing on top of a tomb.
Yes, and they're being bad and mean, and they're torturing somebody.
Ugh.
Some other boy. They're horrible, and it's so low. It's oof. Then
the industrious prentice, a favorite and entrusted by his master.
So he's being good. His master's entrusting him to take care of the entire shop while he's out. And it's got a passage from Matthew underneath, and it's showing him behaving and in a very orderly and methodical kind of background. And what's happening to the idle prentice?
The idle prentice turned away and went to sea.
Sent to sea.
Sent to sea.
That's the long S.
Oh, there
like
it is.
Beethoven,
Got it.
The long S. So he's being sent to sea because he's bad. So he had to be sent out to sea as a sailor because he can't be trusted to stay in town. Here's a thing from Proverbs, which is going to basically say, you can't behave, you have to go be a sailor. Next, the industrious prentice.
The industrious prentice out of his time and married to his master's daughter.
So here's a young man who did so well, kind of like Hogarth, who married his master's daughter. Interesting, and going to rise through society. Well, all of the riffraff are off to the sides. There's Proverbs that is going to tell you about how the virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. So that's even how young ladies know how to behave and be a crown to their husband, not something to the negative. So the good boy is getting married to the master's daughter.
Well, and his name is already on the sign.
Oh, so you could climb and what's happening here?
Oh, gracious. The idle prentice returned from sea and in a garret with a common prostitute.
Prostitute. That's
Why are you lisping?
Prostitute, because it's done with
because
the long F. Right, so here we go. Ping, it's going to get even bigger.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Never.
The font style of the titles on the top of these prints is the style of font that we used for the Platemark logo.
Now, okay, so are we going to be a common prostitute?
Well, luckily we don't have that problem in Platemark.
No, we don't. But here, now you can see, oh, look, he's shacked up in this horrible interior. There's a cat falling down the chimney. There's terrible things happening. He's shacking up with the poor girl. She's playing with her trinkets that she's gotten from a bunch of other guys.
Oh, boy.
And Leviticus chapter 6, verse 36, the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase him. Basically, don't do the naughty stuff. Okay, so that's where that came from. Our Platemark came from that, huh?
Platemark, the letters that make up the logo came from Hogarth.
Well, thank goodness for small miracles. Don't worry, folks. We're getting close to the end now. The industrious prentice.
The industrious prentice, grown rich and sheriff of London.
He has risen to power and is now a legal leader of the city. And see, everybody's behaving. He's at the head table. It's just, and look how orderly and methodical everything is. And let's see, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7 and 8, with all thy getting and understanding, exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee the heavens when they dost embrace her. It's just, you be a good Bible-fearing person and behave indoors. Look at that, Anne. This is how to behave.
Wow.
Right? And again, all the good trappings of what will happen if you behave well. All right, but wait. There's just a little bit more. What's going to happen? Oh, my God. The idle prentice.
The idle prentice betrayed and taken in a night cellar with his accomplice.
So now they're in a really naughty place and they're doing something terribly wrong. And then
the industrious prentice, alderman of London, the idle one brought before him and impeached.
By his accomplice.
By his accomplice.
Once upon a time, they were both
the same level.
And now one is being brought before the judge and he's remembering this. Oh, I remember you when we worked at the same time, and look how much pain it's brought to the judge, and he's pleading. So we've got both of them in the same scene. And finally, The idle apprentice,
Executed at Tyburn.
which is the gallows grounds outside London, and the industrious apprentice is now
Lord Mayor of London.
and the whole city is happy and cheering and they respect him. And this is industry and idleness. You can come from nothing. If you work hard, play hard. If you work hard, you will achieve greatness. If you do the wrong thing, you will become Donald Trump. So, industry and idleness. Was it a hit? What do you think?
Maybe people would enjoy watching the parallel paths. I don't know. Was it a hit?
It was very well received.
Yeah.
And it was affordable. Think about this. He's marketing it. And he's also picking his audience because he wants to try and help out the youngsters. What can I do? What can I use with my own intellect to help people out? Now, if you think that was annoying, then let's just go to the next tidbit, which really shows, only 4 years later, that he is going to tackle something. His next, if you will, social virtue will be a pair of images that I've only seen one at a time, but actually were intended to be seen together. And they're known as Beer Street and Gin Lane. And they're amazing to me because they were published in 1751 and they were meant to be seen as a pair. They were pendants for each other and they depict the evils of the consumption of gin, which at the time was any kind of distilled spirit, as a contrast to the merits of drinking beer. Now, let's first of all think about why beer exists.
Well, water was so dirty that beer would be clean because it was distilled and whatever else.
Safer.
Safer.
Right? Yes. Now we think beer drinkers because we have fluorinated water and we don't have any lead pipes like in Flint that are filled with dung that are flowing through the streets of the city. Beer was considered okay. There's so many political aspects to this gin thing, you wouldn't even believe it. It's amazing to me. There's one YouTube video in this that's just unbelievable. It's like, oh, you're kidding me. It's so hip. It's so of its time. It's amazing. And in some respects, it almost echoes the opioid epidemic.
Oh, gosh.
It really does. So at the same time that he is publishing this, it is being published at the same time that Henry Fielding, who is a friend of his, who's a magistrate and a playwright and an author, he's publishing an inquiry into the late increase in robbers. He wants to know, why are there more robbers out there? And they're issued together. And the next cycle that I'm going to show you, the Four Stages of Cruelty, also came out at the same time in 1751. And these prints continue the movement that Hogarth and others were doing. So they're not just laughing at fashionable society more, like he had with Marriage a la Mode, but they're actually trying to get more cutting satire to deal more with the problems of now, of poverty and crime and the lives of everybody.
Reform.
Absolutely. Just like I said at the beginning, it's like, how do you improve society? And so if you want to think about it, it's a very simple level. Beer Street people are happy and healthy, and they're nourished by this native English small beer and ale concept. The nice little beers and ales that are produced, and it's because not people want to get wasted, but they don't want to die because they don't want to drink infested water. Beer Street depicts industry, health, bonhomie, and thriving commerce. And those who live in Gin Lane are destroyed by their addiction to the foreign spirit of gin. And it shows shocking scenes of infanticide, starvation, madness, decay, and suicide.
Wow.
And you thought, but at surface level, okay, that's what we think. You got the good and the bad. But the other thing is, if you pick it apart even harder and you go layer by layer and you go under it, you'll start to see even more layers that we would even begin to understand at this level. So there are many, many nuances that we don't get. And there are some that would say that some of the rightness that appears in Beer Street are what caused the problems of Gin Lane. And that'd be the way we see things now. You know, why are people in the inner city doing poorly? They don't have as good an education. Why do they have these issues? It's because the society that built them, right? I'm giving you both of these views just for you to start picking apart. Beer Street on the left and Gin Lane on the right.
I've looked at the Gin Lane. I don't think I've ever seen Beer Street. This is fascinating.
Exactly, and that's the thing that's amazing to me.
Well, you can imagine why it would be less popular to collect, because it's
What, Beer Street?
Because it's good.
Yeah, it's the good stuff, right?
Good stuff, right? The bad stuff's always more interesting.
Of course it is.
Visually, anyway.
I mean, come on. The 7 Deadly Sins are a whole lot more fun than 7 versions.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Beer Street has it's a street corner, and there are happy people about with tankards of beer. There's a fishmonger in the lower center. She's got a list of something. I can't quite see it. There's an artist, a sign painter on a ladder above everybody painting a sign. There's some men on the roof behind.
Working, doing good things.
Oh, so everybody's working and happy.
Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of text at the bottom if you wanted to try and extricate it.
I can't
It's
read
in,
it.
but notice how decent and clean and clear it really is. Let's see if I can give you slightly more expansion on that.
Okay, please do.
Well, Anne's absolutely right about how orderly and methodical. And look, there's even a scene of just loving couple there in the left-hand view. And on the right hand is Gin Lane, and that's the one that we all see. And this was published at the same time as Fielding's essay, both of which contributed to the passage of the Tippling Act, otherwise known as the Gin Act of 1751. Yeah, they actually led to legislation.
Outlawing gin?
Let me just give you this great passage. Gin was one of the, you're going to love this. Gin was one of the wide range of new intoxicants, including chocolate, coffee, opium, sugar, tea, and tobacco, that in what has been called a psychoactive revolution, radically expanded the mind-altering possibilities for European people between 1600 and 1800. Spirits, mainly aquavita, a rough distillation of wine, had been manufactured in English monasteries, private homes, and apothecaries' shops since the late medieval period, although they were prohibitively expensive and generally consumed medicinally and in small quantities. Brandy, rum, whiskey, and especially gin exploded the spirituous marketplace from the later decades of the 17th century, with various factors, including grain surpluses, restrictions on French imports, the English banned French imports, a relaxation of the monopoly on distilling, and increased duties on ale and beer, making gin's rise particularly meteoric. Originally imported from the Netherlands by the 1690s, gin was produced on an industrial scale by domestic malt distillers who sold their wholesale product to a network of smaller compound producers. These producers then rectified it with a variety of botanical additives, including juniper berries, coriander seeds, orange peels, angelica root, licorice powder, and turpentine.
Oh, my.
By 1725, according to the Cumbria distiller George Smith, gin had, quote, gained such universal applause, especially with the common people, there was more of it in quantity sold daily in many great distillers' shops than of beer and ale vended in most public houses, end quote. It was considered the new modern drug. Put simply, gin hit early modern drinkers differently, offering not a gradual descent into inebriation, but instantaneously an extreme drunkenness. From this potency stemmed a range of unusual and frightening side effects, widely rehearsed by English 18th century commentators, including immorality, criminality, madness, compulsive intoxication, and death. As one anonymous 1736, and that's just prior to this, as one anonymous 1736 author observed, quote, by taking a small quantity, people were almost in an instant rendered so much intoxicated as to lose the use of their reason and all command over themselves, and were induced to commit the most wicked or extravagant enormities. Likewise, in her 1750 treatise aimed at female gin drinkers, Eliza Haywood warned that whereas conventional beverages made their consumers, quote, sullen, sleepy, or extravagantly gay,
What?
gin made them bold, obstinate, and filled with an extravagant desire of doing mischief. We may say that dram drinking is the most expeditious way to deprave mankind of their reason by substituting a temporary and in times a constant frenzy in its stead. It was a demon in a bottle. It was so much stronger. So if we look super carefully at Gin Lane and you notice what things are named, it's really quite remarkable. Because notice how everything is logical and beautifully laid out for you on the left. On the right, what do you see, Anne?
All right, so this is Gin Lane. Let's see. Well, first of all, the figure in the middle who is sitting on some steps is a woman in tatters, obviously drunk, and has lost control of her baby who's falling over the side of the stairs.
Literally lost her grip on the baby slip. Ah! baby's falling over the edge. It's going to die. There's no question. And she's got sores and stuff all over her legs, and she's dipping snuff too. She looks like hell, right?
She does look like hell.
What else? What's this guy over here on the left-hand side? You have Gripe, the pawnbroker.
Gripe, the pawnbroker.
They're pawning their stuff, like even their clothing, so they can buy more gin.
They're selling stuff. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Here we have the distiller, and his name is Killman.
Oh, gosh.
And then the undertakers are the only other ones. The pawnbrokers, the distillers, and the undertakers are the ones that are making money.
Oh, boy.
Notice the signboard that's hanging is a coffin.
It's a coffin.
They're banging together a coffin. Here there are people falling off roofs. They're
oh, my goodness.
Disease and death. They're falling into depravity. This thing is so loaded. It's just really racked with the sense of demise, as it should be, because it's gin lane. Think about it. It's psychoactive revolution. This is what's our current
opioids.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a painkiller to lower classes. They used to be able to say, what was it? Drunk for a penny, blind drunk for a tuppence. You would sell anything to get your next fix of gin, to just take your mind off of the hideousness that was life for the poor. And it was imported and it was distilled and it was there. So they passed this act so that it was hard. It was like prohibition. They had to, because the whole city was coming to death. Now, notice something about Beer Street. I put this here just to get it across to you about how orderly and methodical and beautiful it was.
Yeah. So earlier we were looking at a chart that showed us the elegant S curve. And Tru has noted that in Beer Street, the artist who's painting the sign on the upper left follows a S curve form.
That beautiful line of beauty that Hogarth mentioned. Now notice how in perspective it is and orderly and perfect it is. It's amazing, really.
Yeah.
How many of these newfangled problems that the spirit would have on London's people. So what is it? Not only the people and the instruments that thrive among the undertaker, the pawnbroker, the purveyors of the deadly gin shop, those are the only ones that are going to do well, and everyone else, which is all the poor folks of London. That's somebody that Hogarth, again, was trying. It wasn't just to be restrictive. We're not trying to take away your rights. We're trying to protect you from yourselves. Because life was so hideous, they had to get a fix of gin. Imagine that. Because it was affordable. So they had to come up with a way to overrule that. So get that. The same year was published this next cycle. It's only 4 plates. It sold in huge numbers. It was extremely popular.
Gracious.
And this is called The Four Stages of Cruelty.
Yikes.
Hogarth had said that he had created this print series, quote, in the hopes of preventing in some degree correcting that barbarous treatment of animals, the very sight of which renders the streets of our metropolis so distressing to every feeling mind. And remember, this is a guy kind of like one of the ashcan artists that would spend his time walking around looking at the street. And again, he's the storyteller, but he's always concerned with the consequences of humans' actions. Son of a schoolmaster, a bit of a preacher in his own right. The first plate is showing us.
This is terrible.
Good. This is only plate 1. Tell me what you're seeing, Anne. It just reminds me of what we're leading to next. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
See? Now pretend that it's the 18th century and you're finally seeing artwork that fascinates you. Go
yes,
ahead.
Yes. Okay, so it looks like a schoolyard tussle, but you have groups of boys, naturally, doing things to animals. The most wicked of which in the center is they're shoving a cane up some poor dog's butthole.
Mm-hmm. And our hero, air quotes, his name is Tom Nero, the new guy, kind of like Nero in Rome Burning. Tom Nero is the character that we'll follow, is the young boy who's savagely mistreating this dog. And he also, on his clothing, sports the badge of St. Giles Charity School. That's where the orphans and foundlings would go.
Oh.
And so Hogarth is attacking the charity school apprenticeship system. So Hogarth is essentially attacking this system that the charity schools would have of trying to help boys or young people into the apprenticeship system. And it was supposed to lead abandoned children to a life of virtue. But in reality, think about this. It prepared them for the cesspool. Little boys, Lord of the Flies. It's just like what they're going to turn into. it just shows these boys doing so many icky things. I remember my brother at about that age, they would put firecrackers in the fish that they'd pull out of the pond, just to do evil shit.
Jesus.
Right? And boys, like the magnifying glass on the ants kind of thing.
Right.
That's the first stage of cruelty.
Right.
Here we have the second stage of cruelty. Now remember, extremely popular, sold in big numbers. In the second place, Tom Nero is a young man working as a coach driver, and he has been mistreating his horse. And the horse now has a broken leg, and everyone around them are also showing examples of what you do to be mean to animals on the public streets of London. You can very definitely tell that it's London.
Yeah.
And here's Tom Nero beating flogging his almost dead horse, very much a broken leg. And you can see that the sheep herder is also beating his sheep for not being herded into town properly. And it's that kind of, oh my gosh, they're even running over a little kid with a cart there. See that? You see it. Now it's getting your attention. Stage 3, cruelty in perfection. In Hogarth's third plate, Nero has become a highway robber, and he's being apprehended for killing Anne Gill, his pregnant lover.
What?
Yeah, he's a robber, and now he's been hanging out, and he's killed his the woman he stooped.
Yikes.
Right? So he's being hauled off. And in each of them, there's also, of course, a poem. To the lawless love, when once betrayed, soon crime to crime succeeds. At length beguiled to theft, the maid by her beguiler bleeds. Yet learn, seduced man, nor night, with all its sable cloud, can screen the guilty deed from sight, foul murder cries aloud. The gaping wounds, the blood-stained steel, now shock his trembling soul. But oh, what pangs his breast must feel when death his knell shall toll.
Good gracious.
Now he's being hauled off because he's doing the wrong thing. And again, if you took the time and you knew the symbols of the day, you would be picking this thing apart. Yep, go ahead.
Little owl up there.
Almost like a Goya. Admittedly, this is 50 years before Goya, but hey.
Oh, hey, there you go.
Now here you go. This is the best. The reward of cruelty, the fourth stage.
Oh my God.
What do you see? Just tell me what you see in the final scene. You've seen a scene like this before. It was okay when we saw it before.
Yes.
It looked like Vesalius dissecting
it's an anatomy classroom-ish thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and there's a body on the stage, and there's multiple people.
They're all wearing professor's hats.
Yes.
Are they not?
Yes, the professors are cutting open.
It looks like it might even be a vivisection.
I hope he's not alive.
Well, that's why I said vivisection as opposed to dissect. Vivisection means being opened up when you're alive. In the final scene, Nero has been hanged and his body is being dissected in the Cutlerian Theater near Newgate Prison. Think of this. This is the operating theater near the prison.
Ooh.
It's recognizable. You can even see, oh, look, there's skeletons hanging in the...
Yeah.
We should really put it against the Vesalius operating theater because it really would be. Right? And he's put, hey, it could be like that. But the skeletons are pointing at each other.
Right.
And they're warning each other something. How? The public was invited to view these gruesome dissections, and this scene reflects back on the first plate where the young boys staged their own theater of gruesome operations. And now look down in the bottom. See the dog that looks like the dog that was being mistreated before? What's it doing?
It's eating the heart.
Yeah, it's, This looks good.
Ugh.
Turnabout is fair play, right?
But the funny part is not funny.
Interesting.
Is that a dissection prior to this was for science and
it was for
understanding.
Science, but they only used criminals.
Right? Isn't he a criminal?
Yes, they hanged him, and that's why it's being shown.
Right.
You're going to be a criminal, and this is the come about. This is the reward of cruelty. You are a criminal. He's been hanged. Actually, so look at how really good the anatomy is on the leg. The Hogarth, he's done a good job here.
Yeah.
And this guy is like literally, as they're disemboweling him, all the guts are going to be dumped into the gut bucket, and then over here they're boiling in a cauldron. They've got the heads and the bones of others that were that way. Looking at the doctors, they're like, oh God. The part that really grosses me out is how this one doctor is digging out one of the eyeballs.
Eyeballs, yeah.
Another one is working on the feet.
Yeah.
It's, hey, we were okay with it when it's for science.
Well, exactly.
It's stem cells. You're killing babies. But this was the reward for cruelty. Keep that in mind. Because behold the villain's dire disgrace, not death itself can end. He finds no peaceful burial place, his breathless corpse no friend. Torn from the root that naked tongue, which daily snore and cursed, those eyeballs from their socket wrung that glorious with lawless lust. He's not the best poet, but boy, can he engrave. But the other thing is that Hogarth is again showing the horrible conditions in prisons, the outcomes of these things, the conditions that Henry Fielding, the guy that was the magistrate, the author, the playwright, had written about. Why is there more robbery? Because of the gin. What he'd even written about it in his novels like The History of Tom Jones and many other plays. It was like, why is our society this way? Hogarth is still seeing his prints as the stage. And I really have to salute him for, think about this now. We've had Industry and Idleness, How to Become a Better Human Being. And you have Beer Street and Gin Lane, watch out. And it has to deal with contemporary politics and economics and that socio-political scene. This is stuff you need to be aware of. And then you have the Four Stages of Cruelty. Think about this also. Hogarth was also an active governor of the Foundling Hospital.
What?
The very first home in London for abandoned children. And he made paintings for that institution. That's why this guy's doing scenes like Industry and Idleness.
I see.
He is an artist reformer. He's not just doing this to be a smartass.
Right.
So he's done all of this kind of stuff. You're up on it, I can tell. Now we're just going to get to this one last little cycle because he has been working at the lower classes and he's been looking at the high classes and mocking them and talking about what makes a better person. And then he does a series of 4 paintings in 1755 that illustrate an election, a terrible election that went on in 1754. It's the last painted cycle. These we have to go see in John Soane's museum. Can we please? Can we please?
Museum,
okay, yes, because there's a cycle of oil paintings. But again, he makes this into a cycle of engravings. And I will tell you that in this cycle of engravings, it can't be any different at all than one of the reasons I was trying to get this episode done so we could beat the election. And now I'm not sure we will, but it'll prove that Hogarth was still so very right.
Yeah.
In his time and place, because the only thing we learn from history is that we
don't learn from history.
So this Oxfordshire election of 1754, the Whigs, which were considered more the progressive party, had decided to challenge the conservative Tory party. They had a stronghold on that area. And there had been an election. It was disputed. And guess what? Should sound a little familiar.
Oh, Parliament decided the winner?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no.
Doesn't that sound a little familiar?
That sounds bad.
Doesn't it sound a little bit like somebody who disputed an election and somebody had to make... And so this was a problem. Well, so Hogarth had created this whole cycle of 4 engravings, and it takes place in a fictional country town of Guzzledown. And the first 3 paintings, election entertainment, canvassing for votes, and the polling, really show us all about the corruption in the parliamentary system of elections in the 18th century. But they also predate the Great Reform Act of 1832 because it was this visual awareness, wouldn't you know, that would help lead to reform.
Gotcha.
The last painting will show, chairing the member, shows the celebration. Wait. So, it's some 70 years later, but the thing to keep in mind at the time this was being created was that each constituency, the Tories and the Whigs, had to have property qualifications in order to be able to have a vote. So only the minority of male... Is
it poll tax?
Well, let me put it to you another way. Let's put it like this. At the time that these were made, each of the constituencies can elect 2 MPs. They have to be property owners. And so obviously it only means that the minority of males have the power to vote.
Right.
There wasn't a secret ballot, and so bribing and intimidating were everywhere about. Now, we would say that's not fair. Of course, there was now that say, no, they were really trying to be good. But by looking at these images, you'll be able to see that Hogarth didn't believe that one bit. And the other thing that you can't tell in the black and white engravings is that in the painting cycle, the Whigs are in orange and the conservative, the Tories, are in blue.
Okay.
Sorry. Why do you get these 2 parties? Why do you give them colors? It's interesting.
Well, to keep the...
Yeah.
Well, you have to keep track of the people on stage, and it's like team colors, right? You have
to
know who's who.
So how much have things changed?
Not at all.
So basically, you can see this whole catalog of behaviors in these 4 images about how people will behave, and they want to win by any means possible, by any dollar, whatever it takes. So the election that took place in 1754 is a series of paintings that he creates in 1755, and then he publishes them essentially the year after that. The system of 18th century England, the product of the Glorious Revolution and the defenestration of absolutist King James II, Stuart, of 1688, was hardly based on universal suffrage. Women, of course, could not vote, but neither could the majority of British subjects. The British voter was either a free man or a burgess, each of whom could meet the property qualifications of £10. Vote buying was common enough. For example, 2 individuals were fined and imprisoned for bribery during the 1696 parliamentary elections, and Erector of Durham in 1803 was fined £500. Even as late as 1840, voting irregularities compelled the authorities to declare the elections for Cambridge and Ludlow void.
Huh.
But wait, here's a great passage.
Okay.
Previous to the publication of this series, Mr. Hogarth's satire was generally aimed at the follies and virtues of individuals. Here he has ventured to dip his pencil in the ocean of politics and delineated the corrupt and venal conduct of our electors in the choice of their representatives. That these 4 plates display a picture of any degree applicable to the present times, i.e. after the Great Reform Bill of 1832, cannot be expected. But they are fine satires on times gone by when the people of Great Britain were so far from being influenced by a reverence for public virtue that they began to suspect it had no existence. Excuse me, does this just not sound like right now?
Yeah.
No reverence for public virtue. William Hogarth exemplifies the contentious and predominantly masculine urban society of 18th century England. I thought you should know that. Let's go I'm just showing Anne a comparison of the originals in color and the following. So here's your first view.
Okay.
The very first one is called The Polling. All right, so where do you think we are in this image?
Well, it looks like a tavern to
You're
me.
so right. It is in a tavern where the Whig candidates are trying to get their parties act together. And what's interesting is that you can see that there's a Tory rally going on outside, kind of like Butler, Pennsylvania. The conservative Tories you're not going to like this. The conservative Tories are carrying an anti-Semitic caricature of a Jew.
What?
Which is a reference to a recently passed law that the Whig government had put through that basically said that you could let Jews into England and let them become citizens, and the Tories were against that.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to give this to you again.
Okay, wait. The Tories are the conservatives.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The Whigs passed a law letting Jews into the country.
Correct.
There were no Jews in England before that.
Let's say the refugees.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Here, let's let Getline summarize for us.
Okay.
Hogarth despised the French, chiefly, it seemed, because they weren't English. To some extent, he shared this countryman's fears of the Jews and the Catholics, those inefficient conspirators who, even today, haven't much furthered their dark designs by conquest. This is an out-of-date book. Both conspiracies are recorded in passing in Humours of an Election Entertainment. The first plate, the election series, the candidates are feasting their constituents. Votes are bought for both money and love. Through the open window may be seen an effigy with a Levantine profile, that means a Jewish profile, hung with the sign, "No Jews!" This refers to a proposed bill of the 50s whereby immigrant Jews would be permitted to become British subjects. Britain was in danger and Britons rallied. The Tories didn't want that. On the floor is a paper. This is also fascinating. Give us our 11 days. England had but recently joined Europe using the 200-year-old Gregorian calendar, and the feeling was widespread that the Pope of Rome had somehow stolen 11 days from the lives of Englishmen.
What?
Again, as Hogarth reports, Britons rallied, but you can't win them all, and the Englishmen never have gotten their 11 days back.
What? Who cares?
They did. Would you want to...
Wait a minute.
They're taking your guns. They're going to make your books. They're going to steal your souls. It's the same kind of crap. Okay, let your kid read the book you want your kids to read, right?
Right.
All right, in the U.S. They're going to take our guns.
Right.
They took our 11 days. Blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Everybody that's living in the United States right now about whatever hot button issue, who cares? It's the same thing.
Right.
They're all upset about it. They're going to come to blows over it. They're petitioning. It's now. I want to see what the TV historians 200 years hence have to say about this bullshit we're enduring right now.
Yes.
Because it's shameful and it's embarrassing and it's awful. And so we have those things. It's also wonderful. We look like we're in a tavern. Anything else about this scene that you can notice? It seems like they're having dinner. There are people sitting at a dinner table. If you go all the way around, you'll notice that there's 13 at the table.
Oh.
One of them is a guy, one of the Whigs, is kissing some old woman, an ugly old woman, maybe to get her vote, while some little kid is adjacent and is trying to steal the rich guy's ring. But it's also, if you think about 13 at the table, it's a Last Supper, and that's the kiss of Judas.
I see.
And here at the head of the table is the head guy who has overeaten his oysters, a rich man's food, and he's being bled by the doctors behind him.
Oh, gosh.
And we also have a guy who has a head wound that they're just pouring liquor into. And somebody else has hucked a brick through the window. And these guys are ready to throw furniture out the window at the opposing party. And there's a kid who's probably spiking the water here. And this bedlam and mayhem all ensues. And it's really showing us all of these different ways that the supporters or the bad people are doing whatever they can to get the votes that they want. Let's see, words.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, there was even something about marriage and loyalty that's in there. See, an orange banner containing the words liberty and loyalty stand in the corner, while outside the window, the Tories carry a banner with the liberty and property it's there. Okay, so there's, say, liberty and loyalty, the Whigs do, loyalty to country, figuratively the Democrats. And here we have liberty and property. That's the conservatives. It's not that much different than it is these days. The words marry and multiply in spite of the devil refer to the Clandestine Marriage Act of 1753, and those have been added in another banner. In the foreground, a maimed soldier sits on the floor whilst a patron pours gin into his head wound. Oh yes, Sir John Parnell, the first baronet, is seen seated below the window using his hand and a napkin as a puppet. See this? Mr. Sock says.
Oh my goodness.
So this tells us all about the Last Supper, and it questions everything that's going on with elections. So that's the election entertainment. The next scene, it's a little easier to read. Go ahead. What do you see?
Let's see.
It does. You don't have to. Just tell me what you see.
Well, it's
21st century viewer.
It looks like a scene outside of a tavern.
I agree.
On the left, there's a table and two people looks like they're arguing or debating some things with their beers. And then under the signs in the middle are two people trying to convince the center figure of something. Mm-hmm. Not sure what. And then there are more figures to the right. And then there's two ladies up on the balcony. I'm having a hard time seeing it.
And then there's a whole bunch of stuff going on the signboard as well.
Oh, yeah, the signboard.
All right. So, yeah, the scene depicts Tory and Whig agents both attempting to bribe an innkeeper to vote for them. Okay. The crowd is outside the tavern. They're visible in the background. There's a whole crowd in the background. It's a reference to the anti-Semitism of the crowd behind, as a Jewish peddler is being employed by another agent who is offering jewels and ribbons to the wives of voters. Oh. See, look here, ladies. You can. Oh, I want some of those. And this is interesting. So hiding in this doorway is a soldier, and the two old sailors on the far left, they represent uncorrupted patriotism. Old soldiers, old sailors. Can't be corrupted. The soldier is peeping through the doorway, and this is so bizarre. Here is a decorative figurehead that depicts the British lion devouring the French fleur-de-lis. It's like
Wow.
Well, it's still anti-French. He's going to British. Yeah. And a woman sits on it looking at her bribes. The sailors on the left side are reenacting a naval battle victory using pieces of broken clay pipe. And then we sailed in and we did this. So this whole business in the middle, there's more. Another source would tell us that in canvassing for votes, the second scene, the action takes place outside the Royal Oak Inn, which was the Tory party headquarters. This is the part that I wanted to know more about. And it says, the inn's sign has been partly covered by another sign that lampoons the Whig candidate, depicting him as the Commedia dell'arte character Punch, pushing a wheelbarrow full of coins he's distributing to voters.
Aha.
See that here? Like
Yes.
all those Democrats would do, the woke. Ironically, just beneath this sign stands the Tory candidate buying knickknacks with which to bribe the girls flirting with him from the inn's balcony, as well as a farmer being solicited simultaneously by political operatives from both parties. There's plenty going on there. But imagine, is there any place else that some English person would see their lives played out like this? And pick it out and pick it apart. Are they going to be reading the New York Times with a complete explication? Are they hearing NPR, which is saying, and today, admittedly, Amazon is one of our underwriters, with any kind of level-headed, let's be as honest as we can? Is it just going to say, there's all this bullshit going on. How are you going to get all the news? And in one respect, it's all clustered into this scene, which I think is quite remarkable. If you didn't know one thing about it and you were to soften your gaze and look at it and go, wow, what a beautiful country scene.
Yes.
Look at how the lights and the shadows are in there. And in some respects, it's so incredibly filmic. They still have the sense of time. Something's being thrown down from the balcony. There's something happening. It's anything but static, isn't it?
Right. Agree.
Boop. This is my favorite, I think, of all of them. All right. What do you think you're seeing, Miss Ann?
I'm not entirely sure. Let's see. Did they build special structures for voting?
I don't think so. I think this is just taking place on
a porch or something? Okay.
So this was the polling. All right.
Okay. So we're on a porch and there are lots of people. Oh, gosh. This is bizarre. Okay. So there's two sort of election judges, I guess, sitting on chairs at the back of the porch. And then there's a lot of people arguing in the foreground of the porch. And then there's people coming up the stairs to the porch that are, I assume, coming to vote.
Yeah, somebody's coming to vote. And in the back, there's a whole cavalcade of humanity coming across the bridge. And then more people coming up. It's so actually, it is a beautiful kind of exterior landscape. It's got some nice little vignettes. There's two flags flying. They're different colors. Gorgeous engraving on the sky. Some wonderful repoussoir elements of the trees that are framing this scene, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
A lovely spotlighted set of
classic.
characters right in the middle.
Yes.
I'll just read it to you from this source because I think it makes it easier than me fumbling my way through. The polling is the third scene of the series and depicts the varied crowds of voters at the polling stand, with the two candidates seated on chairs at the back of the platform beneath their party flags.
Interesting.
They're both there.
But that means there's only one polling place for a town.
Well, sure, it's a little town. Remember, it's what is it called?
It was Oxford or
Gulletville or something.
Oh, yeah.
Each side tries to extract votes from whomever they can while disputing the other side's right to do the same. The Tories try to get the vote of a seated man with clearly... This is so written in 2012 by this lovely curator from the Brooklyn Museum. The Tories try to get the vote of a seated man with clearly diminished mental faculties. This guy's messed up, right? They've gotten him out of probably Bedlam.
To come vote because they need bodies, right?
The Whigs carry up a man in a white shroud who is either dying or already dead.
Oh, boy.
They're running bad people. They're using dead people. 1 million votes. And one of the party's lawyers appears to challenge a one-legged veteran's right to swear his oath with the metal hook that has replaced his hand. You see, we got a veteran who's got a peg leg and he's got a hook because he hasn't got a right hand because he lost it in battle.
Right.
In the background, a carriage emblazoned with Britannia's flag topples over while two coachmen obliviously play cards, further emphasizing the message that political negligence and mismanagement have imperiled the nation.
Wow.
Doesn't it seem vaguely familiar?
Yes.
All those fraudulent votes, we have a miscount, blah, 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 blah. In the polling, Hogarth scoffs at the notion of independent voting as one of the candidates seated in the back already anticipating losing to his complacent opponent, apprehensively shudders at the massive expenditure involved in his campaign, especially in buying votes, while the parade of qualified electors crowds the polling station. Hogarth, by implication, praises the faithful servant of his nation, the mutilated old soldier, who is being sworn in by the clerk, while exposing the incompetency of the other voters, who include a deaf idiot, a man in fetters, a madman instructed how to vote by the innkeeper leaning on his shoulder, and an imbecile wrapped in a blanket and transported to the polling booth by 2 attendants. Whereas the satire in the third plate involves the low caliber of the unlettered and undiscerning electorate, imbeciles and moribunds being persuaded to make their marks, in the final scene, Hogarth celebrates the atavistic forces unleashed by the election victory. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
We see the successful candidate, like a fat powdered capon, born in triumph by his bruisers, who are still carrying on their private feuds. And I must confess that Hogarth conquers my prejudice by the figure of the blind fiddler, a real stroke of the imagination outside the usual range of his moralizing journalism. You see here, this is called the honors of the election. They're showing the winner being carried in his chair. And so off he goes, this big fat capon being carried, and the city is all responding to how the election went. What do you notice there, Miss Ann?
Well, it's like a procession through a small street, and the chair upon which the winning candidate is seated is falling over.
Yeah, it does look like it's going to fall.
Yes, he's holding on for dear life. His tricorn hat is falling off.
Mm-hmm.
The procession is led, in fact, by a blind violinist on
You mean
the
like
left.
the blind leading the blind?
Blind leading the blind.
Mm-hmm.
And right behind the blind guy is a bear with a monkey on his back.
Yeah.
And a rifle that is being shot as we speak.
Yep. And it's the monkey that's got the arms that's shooting into the crowd. And look, there's even a death's head on the top of that column. And it's just showing the complete downfall of what could be happening. There's a ghost.
There's a goose up there flying in the sky.
Like it's getting ready to be cooked. This thing is so right. Look at this beautiful shadow that's being cast. It's almost like the
Rembrandt.
The school master who's hanging over and saying, "Remember, I warned you."
Oh.
It almost feels, to me, it
Yeah.
looks like the one wise person there. And now Lisa Small of the Brooklyn Museum had written, although many of the allusions in the election series prints presuppose an insider's knowledge of the politics, procedures, and characters of the time, Hogarth's witty and scathing take on the craziness that can surround the democratic process is timeless. And I have to absolutely agree.
Yikes.
Yep.
What's going on the lower right there? Is that a naked person?
Oh, sure. That guy does look, in fact, naked. He looks like he's doffed his clothing. There's some kind of...
The emperor's
started eating something
clothes?
freshly cooked. Oh, my goodness. Oh, by the way, this plate is humbly and earnestly dedicated to George Hay, who was a supporter of Pitt and the owner of several paintings by Hogarth. Hogarth would occasionally inscribe some of these to people he truly, truly respected.
Huh.
Now, while I was looking, I just have to tell you that while I was looking at this whole election cycle, which is the first really political humor we've seen, but also really delicately, quite amazingly portrayed using the design of beauty and perspective and line and shape and color and texture. I thought it reminds me of some election scenes, and I couldn't help but think of someone else.
Oh.
And it made me think of George Caleb Bingham, who was doing an election series in the middle of the 19th century in America. And so it made me think of Stump Speaking. It's a series of 3 genre paintings, and they all live in St. Louis. And then as I was fumbling around looking for these paintings, all of which are here in front of Anne at the moment, the very first of them is called The County Election, and it's showing, the entire populace coming through and voting. And this is taking place in a little election out in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is called Stump Speaking, and it shows the candidate who's on a podium speaking out to the various people that he hopes to be able to serve. There are those that would say that this is the past, the present, and the future that are embodied by the 3 other people on the stands. And then the last one, which has been called The Verdict of the People. And they're all like, yay, we're Americans, we've elected someone, and people are happy, or they're not. Especially the black man who is down in the front, and he is crumpled in a position which looks amazingly like the Dying Gaul.
Sure does.
A Hellenistic sculpture, which shows you that George Caleb Bingham, a self-taught painter who was working out in Missouri, would also know and evoke these things. And I keep wondering if he knew anything about Hogarth. The more things change, the more things stay the same. And then the other thing I discovered was, sadly, was that in his swearing in, in 2016, Trump wanted this image behind him, which was called The Verdict of the People by George Caleb Bingham, He wanted it exhibited behind him when he was sworn in. The one that I exactly. So here in the centerpiece of the three, the stump speaking, a candidate leans forward to list his points before a crowd of rural citizens. Behind him sits an opponent with tablet in hand, taking notes for his turn at the makeshift podium. You know, the debate. The artist, George Caleb Bingham, was a Whig Party candidate for the Missouri State Legislature in 1846, though Bingham won by 3 votes.
Wow.
The election was contested and given to his opponent, Erasmus Darwin Sappington, who is the speaker shown there.
Whoa.
Scholars have used Bingham's drawings to identify individuals in this work. The large seated gentleman behind the speaker is Meredith Miles Marmaduke, part of the Democratic political machine. The gentleman in the white coat and top hat is State Senator Claiborne Fox Jackson. Although these figures were recognizable to Missourians, Bingham intended this painting to celebrate the democratic election process more generally for a national audience. Here's the other thing I wanted to bring to your attention. So the closer look at Donald Trump's chosen painting, The Verdict of the People. It's a warts and all picture of antebellum democracy in action. And the past is never dead. It's not even past. William Faulkner wrote, "It's fitting, then, that a momentous week that begins with a holiday honoring Martin Luther King Jr. and culminates with the inauguration of America's 45th president should be followed up by a minor but simmering controversy surrounded by a 162-year-old painting, Donald J. Trump Meet the Verdict of the People." It goes on to talk about how he wanted it there. Well, then that's a celebration of racism. And you just be careful about what you choose and what images you use, because it's all still so current. So if you think I was making it all up, I'm not. It just matters to me that we pay attention. It's like, who cares? Oh, we care a lot. I mean, in 3 weeks.
It's no wonder we're all so stressed out.
Awkward. Yeah. What's the first thing I said to you when you walked in?
I wish this was over. No.
Well, that, and I also said you look stressed.
Yeah.
And I know that for all of us it is. And I know that we're not supposed to necessarily demonize the other side, but, unfair things and buying of votes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Right. And so I wanted to point out to all of us that while we've been talking about images that may show the common folk, we are all common folk, and we're all in this soup together, and we all have to pay attention to each other and see what images teach us, however they're presented on the tiny screen. Or we've got so much junk coming on us now, and what's true? Nothing. It can all be photoshopped, it can all be manipulated, and so I guess you have to know what's going on in your heart. And I feel as though Hogarth knew what was going on in his heart, because according to Shikes, in his amazing book, The Indignant Eye, Shikes says Hogarth's targets were a potpourri of human frailty: idlers, gamblers, corrupt politicians, indifferent magistrates, unfeeling and ignorant physicians, lazy artists, insincere clergy, rapacious soldiers. All were grist for the mill that ground out his satirical prints by the hundreds, protected by the copyright law of 1735, which he was instrumental in getting passed in order to protect his work from pirates. Hogarth printed prints embodying these themes decorated thousands of middle-class English drawing rooms. Well, thank God for that. I would like to see who gets to be decorating countless rooms. I'm not going to go over the last little bit of his life, but I wanted to bring to your attention one last image, the last one that he engraved, actually, and it's called the Bathos, or tailpiece. And he engraved this in 1764, the year that he died, and it was for the catalog of his own engravings. What do you see here, Anne?
Well, I see a sort of barren landscape with ruins of a former house, maybe church, and there's a tipping over sign that says "The World's End." And
Look at it, it's even on fire. The world's on fire.
The Father Time is reclining, leaning against the building, and he is breathing out smoke from his pipe that says "Fini."
I think it's just coming straight out of him. It says "Fini." And there's the broken palette of the artist, and these various kinds of a broken gun and a bell that's now broken, all kinds of accoutrements. And there's a whole lot of stories going along. The bathos, or manner of thinking in sublime paintings inscribed to the leaders of dark pictures. Oh, that's also something that Hogarth would call all the old masters, he called makers of dark pictures.
Well, when I was at the Baltimore Museum, we bought a print, and it was this Father Time character smoking a picture.
Exactly. Remember, I did say in the last, he said the dark pictures, they're smoked with age.
Yep.
Well, the year before he'd made this, and this is the year of Hogarth's death, he'd had a paralytic seizure, but he did continue to engrave, and I just wanted to share this with you, because think about what a lion he has been in his time. So in his last year, 1764, Hogarth designed and printed his Farewell to the Vanity Fair of the World. Tailpiece was designed as the close of a catalog of his works, and that it is. Old Time himself, so often the unseen mover of Hogarth's pictorial dramas, because he always used time in such a beautiful way, lies stretched out before us, expiring and surrounded by the broken symbols of his reign. On the distant sea, a broken vessel sinks beneath the waves. In the sky, the sun god dies on his chariot, pulled by dying steeds. Toppling over in the foreground is a tavern signboard for the world's end. Straight down a center perspective, the eye is led from the toppling sign to its echo in 2 dead trees, and at last to a distant gallows. It is the end of Hogarth's world, but the artist began to draw that end from the first honest look he turned on that world. And last but not least, I want to show you how our buddy Hogarth was regarded, even in his own time, by the bulk of humans that could actually understand his artwork and the brilliance of his mark. And I wanted to share with you not only this marvelous portrait of a sculpted portrait by Roubiliac that I had mentioned earlier, but look at this marvelous silhouette, which was a profile silhouette of both Garrick and of Hogarth.
Oh.
That also appeared in the catalog. And it's that same William Garrick, the actor that he had befriended. And Garrick, had composed the inscription on Hogarth's tombstone.
Oh, right.
And this is our final farewell to Old Father Time himself. His tombstone reads, "Farewell, great painter of mankind, who reached the noblest point of art, whose pictured morals charm the mind, and through the eye correct the heart. If genius fire thee, reader, stay. If nature touch thee, drop a tear. If neither move thee, turn away, for Hogarth's honored dust lies here."
Nice.
There's a guy that actually fought for what he meant, and he got some laws passed.
Yeah.
And it mattered to him.
Yeah.
They bitch slapped anybody that needed to be bitch slapped.
Yeah.
I approve this message.
Yes, this is your kind of artist.
Boom.
Okay. Wow. That's great. Thanks, Tru.
You got it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of A History of Western Prints featuring William Hogarth. Thank you to Tru for being our subject matter expert, our SME. Your brain astounds me every time. And thank you also to Dan Fury for being my sound guy, Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, and Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for their studio sounds at the top and bottom of the pod. Images that we talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Over there, you can also do various things. You can leave me a message, ask me a question, suggest an artist we talk about, and you can also click the support and donate button and help me keep the lights on. We will see you next time.